Galen Bingham, and I am really, really excited to have a conversation this time with Dr. William Clark. This is a guy that I have known for some time, and I don't even know how long we've known each other. It's been about 3 or 4 years. We came to know each other on this platform that has long since died and gone out to pasture called Blab. And everyone who's used Blab is bemoaning and looking for the next coming of Blab. And so that's how I met Dr. William Clark. And we've talked about doing a couple of things together over the past year and a half or so. And we've started doing a few things together. Actually, we've got another show that we do together called Leadership and Stuff. But I am just absolutely thrilled to have you as part of this show, the Leadership Toolbox, where we talk about practical things that can help leaders be effective in their day-to-day work. And I can't think of very many people that I go to when I want to get a refresh and a rejuicing on how I'm thinking about some leadership things. So with that, Dr. William Clark, I would love for you to say hello and tell a little bit about yourself.
Hey, everybody. This is kind of awkward, to be honest with you, because I'm always the host in these situations with Galen. And so, bear with me. But Dr. William Clark and Galen and I do host Leadership and Stuff together. I have a doctorate degree in strategic leadership from Regent University and a master's degree in leadership development from Penn State University, and I'm wrapping up a second master's in leadership. So as you can tell, I love this leadership topic a lot. I am an executive at a nonprofit in the state of Connecticut, and I focus on workforce development stuff. So much of the stuff that I research and write about is a part of not only my academic background, but also my practical experience on a day-to-day basis. And I'm also a professor as well at the University of Maryland. I teach, you guessed it, leadership for MBA students. So, I'm all over this stuff, man.
Man, you remind me of my brother in that my brother gets degrees on anything that he's curious about. You've got tons and tons and tons of degrees on a topic that I'm really passionate about. Why leadership? Of all the things that you could be focused on, and that's actually really the crux of why I wanted to have this conversation with you, of all the things that you could be focused on, what was your first attraction to this concept and topic as broad as leadership? And why have you stayed so drawn to it that you've got like 15 different degrees on the topic?
So let's take a step back. It is 2005, graduate with an undergrad degree in IT, and I go to work for a large insurance company. And at that time, I wasn't even considering getting a master's degree at all. I was pretty solid with what I had. And then some of my peers began to talk about, hey, we're going to go get an MBA, from Penn State. So after graduating from Penn State with my undergrad, I said, okay, I'll look into it. And at that time, I felt like when looking at the MBA, I felt like it was kind of that popular degree everybody decided to get. And there was no real rhyme or reason behind it versus to say I got an MBA. And I felt at that time in my career, the things I was doing, I was learning practically at the workplace. And I could learn it much faster and in a more practical way at the workplace than I would in a 2-year master's program going to school at night. And so I said, well, if I'm going to actually consider going to school, I need to study something different. And so I discovered the Master's in Leadership Development Program. And I said, oh, this is cool. This sounds like, something I might want to be doing. And considering I was already leading teams at the time that early in my career, this is probably a discipline that matters more than learning, the things that I was going to learn in the MBA program. And on top of that, many of the courses were very similar. So I was going to get a good chunk of the MBA education anyway. But then as we got to the end, you would, specialize in whatever you decide to specialize in. And for me, it was leadership development. So, I was able to get some MBA education and a lot of leadership education But when I started the program, Galen, one of the things I discovered in the first semester was, one, I was called to ministry. I found that out pretty quick after graduating. And I was considering going to seminary. And I ultimately decided, well, let me just try, the Master's of Leadership first. And when we started our coursework, it dawned on me really, really quick that many of the leadership theories that we're talking about in class sound like scripture. It sounds like Bible verses. And I found myself looking at theory and matching them with scripture and verse. I'm like, wait a minute. I've been learning this stuff as a kid all this time. I might as well just go to seminary. Why finish a secular degree? And I tell this part of the story, I tell people all the time, and it still doesn't make any sense. And I still can't figure it out. So once I discovered that there's a correlation between some of the leadership theory and scripture, I tried to quit the master's program and enter in seminary. And for some reason that I still can't figure out to this day, I could not quit the program. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So I just couldn't do it. And I ultimately decided to finish the program and then go to seminary after the fact. So I ended up getting my first master's. And then I tried seminary right after that, bro. And when I got in and started taking courses, it was not what I expected. The short story of that experience was in the middle of seminary, just not happy with the experience. Heard the Lord say, you need to continue to study leadership. I said, okay. And I ended up quitting seminary, but I asked God, I said, listen, man, but I want to do it from a biblical standpoint, for real. And I ended up attending Regent University, which is a Christian university, a well-respected university at that, where I was able to study not only theory, but also study the text, the biblical text, and how a lot of leadership theory does overlap, how Christian theory, philosophy, and practical teachings applies to the life of a great leader. And how do you articulate that in your writing and in your consulting and teaching? And that's the experience I got from Regent. And that's, how I got this far. But I will say too, man, I grew up in an environment, a church environment where leadership was just talked about a lot. And for many people that grew up in the church I grew up in, for some people it rubbed them the wrong way, and it was good reason for it. But I was fascinated by the topic because of the stringent nature of my Christian upbringing. And part of the decision to study leadership too was to figure out, they talk about this a lot at church, but like, how do you put this into practice to advance a church, a nonprofit, an organization, etc.? That had an impact on my decision to study leadership as well, and so here I am.
Wow. So let's go back even further. So growing up, before the degrees, before the work, the working for I think you said doing IT, before you got into any of that, tell me about, what does growing up look like? Because I believe, here's the reason for the question. I believe that there are things that happen to you at a very, very young age that frames your worldview to a certain degree. And then you start adding on to that worldview, or maybe you find something that might fine tune it. But what are some things from your childhood or coming up, or you talked about how you were raised, that might have led to ultimately Dr. William Clark?
I would tell you, both my grandfathers were deacons in the church. My grandfather in Philadelphia was the head deacon, and he espoused following leadership in the church, which would lead to a quality of life that will ultimately benefit you, in the long run, both spiritually and physically. And my father was the same way. My mom was the same way. When I went onto my mom's side, my grandfather was the same way. So my family was kind of knee deep in church leadership, church involvement, and following the leader, and ultimately following Jesus based upon our faith, was ultimately kind of the guidepost for living the best life you could live. Mm-hmm. My family, however, weren't deep academics. My father finished 2 years of college, and then went to work. My mom has a 4-year degree, but she ended up staying home, taking care of me. And that was the extent of their academic training. So growing up, my brother and I knew going to college was the plan. But beyond that, there was no aspiration. There was no discussion about getting a master's, let alone a doctorate. And I mean, it just wasn't not only talked about in my household, I just don't remember it being a thing in my personal circles either.
Right.
So, it's not like I was like, man, I got to become a doctor and this is like my life's work. That's not how that happened for me. But ultimately, as I said, just the influence of my home church, the experiences there that has shaped me to be the person I am, has caused me to look deeper at what leadership actually means, what it means when you ask people to follow you, whether in the church, whether it's in your organization or your company, and the commitment that you're asking people to make to follow your leadership is a serious responsibility that you're taking on, because you're taking responsibility for people's lives, for their livelihood, for their families. And if you're going to request that, what is it that you have to possess from a character standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a skill set standpoint, that's not only going to be influential in the lives of people, but that's going to give people some security in that if I trust you with who I am, that you're going to take care of me, you're going to take care of what I'm trusting you with.
Right.
And, that responsibility, man, has kind of burdened me all these years. And then I say that in a positive, as most positive way possible, because as folks fall under my leadership, as they are influenced, by me and the decisions I'm making, I cherish the responsibility to advance someone's career, or to advance their thinking, or to advance their way of functioning as a professional. And I take it seriously. I invest in them. And it's because, the way I grew up, that's kind of how leaders function.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great story. And that for me, that really kind of harkens back to the true essence of what leadership is supposed to be, as opposed to what we've seen as of late, where it's really about the trappings. It's really about wearing the fancy suits. It's about, having the money, and the perks have become the essence of leadership anymore, as opposed to what you described. I had a similar, maybe not as dynamic, but a similar situation very, very early in my life, where I was attending my mom's, I think, mother's funeral. So my grandmother, or my maternal grandmother's funeral. And so it was all her side of the family. And my grandfather on my dad's side was a longtime Baptist minister on the Mississippi Delta. And they all had, he pastored like 40 or 50 churches at one point up and down that little stretch. But it was my dad's side of the family. So this was my mother's side of the family's affair, and everyone was coming into town. And of course, my grandfather knew everyone, but this wasn't his family per se. And so I was sitting there with my family, and we were paying attention to the service, and we went to the burial site, pay attention, and I'm kind of emotional. I think I was like 14 or 15 at the time. And, was really trying to come to grips that my grandmother was getting ready to be buried in the ground, that kind of stuff. And I looked around, and I noticed my grandfather peeking around the tent. And he was just peeking around the tent, checking on everyone. And after he checked on everyone, we locked eyes, and he kind of nodded, and then he walked away. And for me, that's just kind of stuck with me, that for him to be a pastor and a minister and a leader to a certain degree, for me, I sensed that he had a responsibility. He felt a responsibility to make sure that everyone was okay. And he didn't want to be seen. He didn't want his presence to interrupt what was going on. But that sense of responsibility that you talked about, I certainly felt that and sensed that. And again, I was 15, didn't really know anything about anything at that point. But that was a core principle that I seemed to grasp at a very, very young age. So it's kind of interesting how you probably have the academic journals that could talk about how your worldview is formed at a young age. Any other scenarios that you can think of where you got a really early taste of this leadership thing, and maybe it didn't maybe it didn't resonate as much when you went through it, but later on you can think back and say, hey, that was pretty significant.
Yeah, man. There are a bunch of stories. There's one story. I was in close proximity to a particular leader. We were literally sitting in the same space and we were having a conversation. And someone knocks on the door, interrupts the conversation, and wanted to share something with this leader. This person thought it was important enough to share. And, this person shared what they had to share, and they walk out. And the leader looked at me with this look of it was a snarky look, and the look, along with his words, clearly indicated that he was annoyed that the person did that. He didn't appreciate what he considered the unnecessary interruption for something so minor while we were talking, and proceeded to say some other things about this person that weren't necessarily nice. The challenge in that moment was I was younger than I am now. This is a number of years ago, so my leadership chops were still being shaped. I knew the person that walked in and interrupted the meeting, and I had a perspective of this person that was now being challenged by the commentary of this leader. And for me, that was one of the most impressionable experiences, because this person that interrupted the meeting, they were being talked about by this leader in almost a derogatory way that made me feel uncomfortable at that age. And I was in my early 20s. And yet this person's allegiance and loyalty was still demanded in spite of what this particular leader thought and felt about that person. And it wasn't about that moment of interruption. It was about this leader's overall perception of this person. And for me, it was one of those defining moments that shaped the importance of, or at least shaped my thinking around the importance of what it means to care for your people, especially when they show their reverence and their respect for you and their allegiance to you, and what you are to give in return in front of their face and behind their back. My godfather had a statement that he said he will tell you the truth to your teeth and behind your back, right? And statements like that stuck with me, that whoever I am, whoever I proclaim to be, whatever I have to say to you behind your back, I'm willing to tell you to your face. And now what I got from that experience was to not copy that foolishness, because I thought it was just wrong, inexcusable, unnecessary. And perhaps she didn't have to interrupt the conversation, but a lot of people interrupted our conversations at the time. And so, it's like it was a normal expectation. But to say what he said really just left an impression. And to this day, I am ultra sensitive to the knowledge and awareness of my people. And what I mean by that is, for people that work for me or who work on teams with me where I'm the responsible individual, I take it as my duty and personal mission to tell them the truth about them to their face. Right? You won't find me saying something behind someone's back that I won't or have not said to their face about their performance, about their impact on the team, good, bad, or indifferent, ways they can get better. etc. One of the things I've said when I started a new job a couple of years ago, when I said to the team, one of my philosophies is no gossip. I'm not going to stand or tolerate it. If you got something to say about someone, say it to their face right now, because gossip and water cooler talk is one of the fastest ways to destroy teams. Is one of the fastest ways to devalue your leadership. And if you can't have the gall or the fortitude or be man or woman enough to say what needs to be said to the person, you're not strong enough as a leader. And then 2, you probably got the wrong person on your team where you can't even tell them the truth. And that's a problem either way you slice it. So that was an impressionable experience for me. And it's something that has stuck with me. And quite frankly, what I've gotten out of that as the years went by, as I share with people what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, are a couple of things. Number one, I'm man enough to tell you what I think about you to your face. So now that I'm sharing this with you, within the culture and the confines of this relationship, give it back to me. Tell me what you think, right? Tell me how you feel, even if you don't like what I'm saying. And you can say what you got to say without the threat of being bullied or written up or fired. In order for a relationship to work between a leader and a follower, there has to be open communication without any threats. And my team that works with me now, they know that without a shadow of a doubt. And then 2, people appreciate the truth eventually, because they'll go somewhere else or they're engaged in a different interaction or relationship, and will discover that they are being talked about or mistreated, and they are the butt of jokes, and they are the last to find out. Versus in a relationship that I try to cultivate with my team members is, you'll never be that. You'll never be mistreated. You'll never be the butt of a joke, because I'm going to tell you the truth, and we're going to wrestle with it together. As I look at my own heroes in my life, Jesus is probably the biggest hero I have. He wasn't that guy. He wasn't that guy to talk about the Pharisees behind their back. He told them to their face what was going on, what needs to happen, and he talked about them behind their back. Like, it was consistent, and for me, it's about that transparent perspective of just communication and leadership all in one, man.
Wow. I mean, there's so much in what you just said I'd love to get into. I don't know if I can even remember everything that I was that you sparked as a question. One of the thoughts that came to mind as I was listening to you is a phrase that I often say, and that is that the truth is often uncomfortable, but it's easy to remember. And so I'm curious, you've got this transparency as a philosophy, as a leadership philosophy. Have there been some times when the truth has been uncomfortable?
I think it's been uncomfortable all the time. And what I've relied upon is just blurting it out and using no filter. Because you're groomed in corporate America, both in the nonprofit, for-profit world, to be politically correct and say things measured way. And trust me, there's extreme value in that. Within the confines of my team, I tend to just say how I think it, and then we'll make it sound pretty later. Because ultimately, what I've discovered, Galen, is that when you're trying to be politically correct or sound uber intelligent, you end up leaving out keywords that properly define and contextualize what you're trying to convey.
Sure.
And if you think back on conversations where people are talking eloquently and trying to sound as their very best self, they'll say what they got to say. Then there's a question. And then the response from the original commentator is, what I'm trying to say is, why don't you just say what you were trying to say in the first place?
Right.
Right. And it can be uncomfortable for me and that person, but once it's out, it's out. And I'm sharing this, Galen, knowing that I'm not perfect. I'm sharing this knowing that I haven't done it well or right all the time. But I just find that I can help you get to where you're trying to go by just telling you the truth. And I'll share this too. And I didn't expect to be sharing kind of my faith principles in this conversation. But a lot of what I say it in love and with love, as Jesus intended to be. And I think that people feel the concern and investment with which my words are shared with them, and people process it from that perspective. Even, and it doesn't mean people still get mad at me. People still feel uncomfortable and disagree with me. But I take pride in knowing that they know it comes from a pure place, because I care about their well-being and what's going to be better for them. And if I withhold an honest commentary of my observation, then I'm hurting that person. But I try to convey it with an intentional love and concern for my team, knowing that at the day we're going to build upon this to grow together to get you where you need to be. And ultimately, from a leadership standpoint, we're going to get where we need to be as a team anyway.
Wow. So, one of the things that you've talked about a lot just now is this idea of transparency and being the same, saying the same thing to your teeth that you would say behind your back. One of the things that has become really popular, I'd say over the last 10 years, when you talk about leadership, specifically high-level leadership, or, corporate CEOs, presidents of the United States, that kind of thing, is this idea of compartmentalizing, where there's two parts of it in my mind. One part of compartmentalizing is what I do here doesn't affect how I show up over there. That's one piece of it. And then another piece of it in my mind is I can be who I need to be with you, and then be who I need to be with this other person. And you would never know that the two people are actually in the same body. Do you see that still? And what's your impression of this idea of compartmentalizing?
Man, so I think early in my career, I would have said it just exactly the way you said it. Where I'm at now is I believe we are the same person at home, at work, in business, etc. You are the same personality type no matter where you are. If you're boring at work, you're probably boring at home. And vice versa. If you talk a lot at home, you probably talk a lot at work. And that's the consistency that, one, you just need to be, because it's easy to be yourself than to be something else. I will say that what is true, at least as I see it, is that there is a dynamic element of our personalities that does exist. I was just recording a podcast, and one of the things I was talking about was how to engage in meaningful conversations. And the first tip I shared was read. And then one of the things I talked about reading was not only read for consumption for professional sake and for personal gain's sake, but read content that's relevant to cultural experiences that you enjoy. And there are dynamics to our personality that makes us who we are. I love biking and I love podcasting. Those are my two hobbies. And those things add some dynamic elements to my personality. And just because, if you ever see me biking on my road bike and, there's a sense of focus I have that you haven't seen before, or a sense of excitement that you haven't seen before, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Nor does it mean it's compartmentalized. It just means that particular activity brings out an element of my personality that requires that, right? But I don't view it as compartmentalizing. The podcasting that I do ultimately isn't bringing anything out of me that is not new to people that know me. The reason is, if you know me, you either know me as a pastor where I'm teaching and preaching. You know me as a professor where I'm teaching and sharing. You know me as a leader at the local nonprofit where, I'm making decisions, but I'm more of a teacher than anything else. Podcasting is just an extension of those things that are part of my personality, and so what you see is what you get if you were on my team, if you were in my classroom, or if you were in my congregation, that in-depth engagement in a subject matter. And so, ultimately, I think that there's consistency in all that we do, and you should allow people to see who you really are. If you're taking on a job, your employer needs to know who they're hiring. Your team needs to know who's leading them. And for me, there's no value in compartmentalizing if that is still a thing these days.
If that's still a thing. You mentioned something that I believe to be true. I haven't found the research, and maybe you know where the research is, but I believe that when people meet a leader, particularly for the first time, but whenever they meet anyone that's supposed to be in charge, supposed to be a leader, they really don't listen a whole lot to the words that they say, because often those words are written by marketing, they're vetted by legal, they are, massaged and that kind of thing. What they're really trying to sense is, what is this person really about, and what will they do with my allegiance? Will my goals be advanced with this person at the helm? And that's something that they sense from every interaction with you. And usually they sense that from watching you interact with other people versus what you're saying from a formal standpoint. What's your reaction to that? Is there any research that would either support that or rebut that? Because that's just kind of my experience.
I don't necessarily have any research that comes to my mind. But I think, my commentary is going to be more anecdotal. And I would say for people who are watching this, if you need any evidence of what Galen said, look at your own life and experiences from your lens and think about the leadership exchanges you've had with people that were leading you and what made you feel the most comfortable and what made you feel uncomfortable. And it's less about the words and more about the actions. Galen, you're right. People observe how you treat other people and they project how you're going to treat them in exchange until there is an exchange or an interaction that changes that. Right. But even for the most part, even if someone treats you well, but mistreats the rest of the team, at some point in the back of your head, you're thinking, man, they're going to do that to me too. What I try to do in my own leadership, Galen, is to treat everybody the same, no matter who you are. Everybody gets the same treatment. I tell you the truth. That person the truth, everybody gets the truth. And if there's any negative commentary or truth that needs to be said to me, I'm going to sit there and take it, no matter who it's coming from. But, we're going to have an exchange. We're going to have a back and forth. And it's just expected with everybody on the team, man. And until people have had a chance to observe it, to see it, to experience it, both personally and from an observational standpoint, they're going to be nervous giving their allegiance to you. They're going to be nervous saying, I'm going to commit to you. And, the Bible talks about, the importance of not being one of those servants or team members who gives lip service. Mm-hmm. The Christian is called to work as an employee as if they're working for God, even if their boss is an unjust individual, totally incapable of leading, shouldn't even be where they are. We're still called to work as if we're working for God. Say specifically, Galen, I was talking about Ephesians 6:5, bond servants, employees, obey your earthly masters, or your bosses with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart as you would Christ, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not unto man, knowing that whatever good you do, you will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a bondservant or free. And here's the converse response for the leader. This is verse 9. Masters, do the same to them and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours, God in heaven, and that there is no partiality with God. And ultimately, he's saying that you as a leader got to be fair in your treatment of your team. And if you're not in a leadership role, you still, regardless of the circumstance you're in, have to work with significant integrity as if your boss is God.
That's kind of uncomfortable. That doesn't fit the way the world views leadership.
Yeah,
that doesn't fit. So, what do you say to those Christian leaders who are still trying to be Christian at church and fit the world's view of leadership, on the job? Because that's totally contrary to what I've seen, actually.
Yeah, I would tell you, if you're a Christian and you're a believer, follow scripture. And let me just kind of dig into this point more. As I started off in my story, I found that many of the leadership theories are found and based in scripture. And when I discovered that, it blew my mind. I had an exchange with a team member in 2017. We had a tough meeting, and I was coming down hard on the team, but the team respected whatever was discussed. Me and this person walked into the car, and he said to me, "How do you do it?" I said, "Do what?" He said, how are you a pastor? And then how are you equally ruthless in the boardroom?" And what he meant by the ruthlessness was, I don't take any mess. I call it like I see it. I call out the foolishness, and we talk about it. And it's a direct confrontational approach. Not necessarily that we got to argue about it, but I'm not going to let it go past me as if I'm Bobo the Fool. And I said to him, let me help you understand, something about the faith. He believes. And I said, dude, the Jesus that died on the cross for you, the Jesus that sacrificed himself for you while he was extremely loving and sacrificial, he wasn't a punk. This is the same Jesus that walked into the temple and turned over tables. This is the same Jesus that called the Pharisees vipers. This is the same Jesus that called out people who were mistreating those who were lowly at heart, people who were struggling and suffering in the kingdom. This is the same Jesus that defended the poor, provided sight to the blind, restored healing to those who were sick, and you weren't even supposed to touch them. This is the same Jesus that spoke to the woman at the well when socially he wasn't supposed to talk to her because he was a Jewish man and she was not a Jewish woman. This is the same Jesus that you loved stroke. This is the same Jesus we love to lift up and praise and worship in all sincerity and softness and caress him, and want to be in his arms. But he's the same guy that was so strong that said, I'm going to give up my life for your life. That's not weakness. So from that perspective, Jesus sets a strong example. And then if you want to dig deeper into the ministry of Jesus, consider Jesus was not a micromanager. He took time away to pray. And there was a specific moment that everybody knows where he sent his disciples out 2 by 2 to particularly practice the things he taught them. He didn't follow them. He didn't check on their work every moment of the day. He asked, go out. He gave them some specific directions and told them to come back and let's talk about it. Now, to me, that's the role of an effective leader. And there are folks out there who are micromanagers. And if you ever work for one, that's extremely uncomfortable. So if you're going to ask me, follow the world's way versus what Jesus did, Jesus gave people chance after chance. He hired someone who was a fisherman and totally inept as a theologian. He hired a physician. He hired a tax collector. He hired people who were woefully, according to the culture at the time, unqualified. This is the same dude that could have brought in theologians and doctors and lawyers of the law to be part of his core group, his core leadership team, but he didn't. So am I to think about hiring and leading in the world's way where if you don't have the qualifications, you won't get considered? Or do I consider the role of Jesus where I look beyond all of what's missing and see what's something within you and say, you know what, I can work with that. You tell me. I mean, I don't know, man. And I think, and I'll summarize my answer with this. Jesus reiterated the fact that the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and might. The second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And based upon that story I told you, Galen, where, the leader was talking about someone in a derogatory form, I have discovered that people who are just unethical, immoral, however you want to say it, unconcerned about people, they mistreat people, they dog people out, they abuse people, they do all that because they're not following the second commandment. And the reason they can't follow the second commandment, and this is a preview to my sermon, depending on when this gets published, either this Sunday or whenever you watch it. The reason why people are unable to love, the reason why people have conflict in their lives at work or in their personal relationships, the reason why people can't get along with nobody, or the reason why people feel like I need to start a business by myself and I don't need nobody to work with me, or I can't have partners. The reason why people feel that way, Galen, is because they have a deficit of love within themselves for themselves. You cannot love someone if you don't love yourself. You can't give what you don't have. Ultimately, when someone comes to your establishment to get a product, your product, if the machine's broken, you can't sell them that flavor, because they either have to choose something else or go to a different establishment in exchange for their money. As a leader, you can't mean well. You can't have positive intentions with your leadership if you don't give yourself the same type of treatment. I value truth-telling. I value honesty. I value ongoing development personally. And so that comes out in my leadership. And that comes from my upbringing. That comes from my view of scripture. That comes from my view of life. And you can support that with, quote, theory that has been initiated by the doctors of leadership, which ultimately, they get the stuff from the Bible, man.
Right. Yeah, something that I hear a lot nowadays is this idea that power doesn't make the man or the woman, but power reveals the man or the woman that's there.
True.
And so to your point, if it's not in you, it can't come out. You can't display it. And I'll tell you one of the things too. I love hanging out with smart people, because you cause me to think about things in a different way than I had before. Because I've been personally massaging and struggling with my own definition of leadership, and revising my own definition of leadership. And just listening to you, there's something about managers direct people in using what they're bringing to the project. So whatever it is you're bringing to the project, I need you to put it over here. I need you to put it over there. I need you to use it this way. And that's management. That's pretty cut and dry. And it's very, very important. We have to have that. But leadership, it occurs to me, is seeing something that is inside of the other person that they may not even know that's there, and somehow drawing that out and providing permission to use it against this project. I know that you've got these skills. I've seen that before, but I believe you've got this other thing. I'd like for you to use that, practice that against this project. And the goal is to hit 8, but I think if we use your skills, we might hit 12. And so leadership is back to what you were saying earlier. It's about seeing something more than what is on the face of that other person, and being able to pull that out and apply that to something tangible, something measurable. How does that feel?
So that feels good. And let me give you 2 biblical examples, since we're just already there. The first one, and this goes back to the question you asked before, do I follow the world's philosophy of leadership or the biblical example of leadership? Moses, if we remember the story of Moses, let my people go, leads people, Israel, out of Egypt. And he's leading nearly 1 million people out of slavery, and is now their spiritual leader, their everything, their guide. And he is now burdened with the oversight of everyday life for this group of people. It is Moses' father-in-law who gives Moses the philosophy of an organizational structure through Judges. And he says to him, since you got people who have different variation of needs and complaints, how about you set up several levels of judges to handle the different levels of complaints and concerns? Lower level concerns, how about you set in charge a certain number? Higher level concerns, set those people in charge. And more serious concern, set those people in charge. This allows you to be free to restore your strength, renew your mind, and spend time with God to develop the vision and direction for the future. And it allows you to serve the needs of the people. Now, we're big on organizational charts. We're big on utilizing people's skill sets and whatnot. This is the first known example of what it means to have such a detailed org chart for the management of a group of people, nearly 1 million people. Here's a second example when you talk about leadership and pulling something out of folks. The biblical character Joseph was known for his dreaming and his interpretation of dreams. And this is the first biblical example of a believer who had a senior leadership role and still acted in his capacity as a kingdom influencer, right? Joseph was the first person to consolidate governmental power. He was the first person in biblical terms to establish a governmental tax. He was the first person to consolidate real estate. He was the first person to consolidate the economic engines of a group of people. And all of this happened because he was able to interpret the dream of Pharaoh of an upcoming famine. And when you talk to me about what it means to pull something out of people. If you remember the story of Joseph, his brothers were jealous of him. His brothers were upset at the fact that he was his father's favorite child. They were upset that he was younger than them. He dreamt dreams of him having some sort of oversight over them, which prophetically came true. He was thrown into a pit. He was later sold into slavery. He was accused of rape. He was thrown into prison for 2 years and ultimately ascended to the second in charge over Egypt. And ultimately, when the famine came, had significant influence over the world economic system. So for me, if it wasn't for the haters, if it wasn't for the jealous folks, if it wasn't for people in my corner like Joseph's father who remembered the gift that was placed inside of him, if it wasn't for Pharaoh who said, and this was a polytheistic individual, he said, Joseph, tell me the strategy to solve the problem with the famine. Joseph tells him what to do. You save a fifth of every grain. And then when it comes time for famine, you can distribute as necessary and consolidate power. Pharaoh, a polytheistic individual, said, truly, can we find any other man that has the spirit of God in him? If it wasn't for pharaohs in our lives who don't believe what we believe, who don't care nothing about our God, who didn't grow up the way we did, if it wasn't for those people who saw something in us, someone who was in jail, someone who was away from home, someone who was cast aside by family, someone who was accused of rape, someone who was accused of stealing, someone who was no longer respected. If it wasn't for the people who looked beyond all the scars of life and saw a gift in us, where would we be? I mean, where would we be? Where would Israel be if it wasn't for Joseph, who they pushed aside, saved for such a time as this? Ultimately, man, you know, leadership is exemplified in so many ways. And we need all types of people to pour into us. Sometimes it looks like Pharaoh. The person makes a decision just like that. We're in a position of authority and influence. Sometimes we need a father-in-law like Moses who's going to speak wisdom and speak truth to us and tell us how crazy we are. Right. And give us strategy to help us because we're too close to the mirror to see what we need to see. Sometimes we need a hater like Saul who's trying to kill David and still force us into hiding to get better at what we're already good at in order to ascend to the leadership role that we're destined to have. Those things that are pulled out of us come in various scenarios and multiple times in our lifetime. So yeah, leadership does include identifying those gifts and pulling them out of people.
Yeah. So something else you caused me to think about. Many of my hard and true leadership philosophies come from a place of screwing it up in the beginning or making some significant mistake in my mind. And the next time I face it, I still don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do that. That doesn't work. I know that for a fact. Have there been some, and I'll just tell you mine, because I want to understand if there have been any mistakes, any failures in your past that now represent a philosophy, a leadership philosophy, because you got it wrong the first time. And I'll share mine. You know, I'm on a nonprofit board where we look at sports and how sports can serve as character building for the youth. So we're trying to make sure that we bring out those character building moments and teaching leadership and principles, that kind of thing. Because even today, I think back to a high school basketball game that I played in. And just like with most high school basketball games, it was a crosstown rival, and there were, seconds to go on the clock and that kind of thing. And we were up by 8 points with a matter of seconds to go on the clock. And we were called for a timeout. And I absolutely remember sitting there on the bench. Instead of listening to the coach, I was calculating, is it possible for them to score 10 points in 43 seconds? And I wasn't paying attention to what I was supposed to be doing. I was trying to keep from not losing the game rather than trying to win the game, which would have been, if I score 3 more buckets, if I can stop them and score 3 more buckets, there's no need for this conversation. But that translates to me in every business situation. I'll always check in to see, am I playing to win or am I playing not to lose? And that's just a philosophy. That's a principle that I have, that because of that basketball game in 1980, that it's part of my leadership platform now. Are there any experiences like that in your life where it didn't go quite right the first time and therefore it's taught you something bigger?
Yeah, one of the standout moments for me is the several years before the 2008 financial crash. I graduated from college and decided to simultaneously start a small real estate investment company, and was able to acquire a couple of pieces of property. But I discovered a couple of things that hurt me. My first property overpaid, and I did this without a mentor because I couldn't at that time find someone to speak into how I wanted to move forward. And when I did find some mentors, they only spoke to certain elements, and I really could have used the help. And I'm not sure if I would have listened, to be honest with you, at that time, which is a leadership lesson in of itself. But then when I discovered I was overextended, I didn't do enough to rectify the situation. So when the crash happened, I lost my business. I lost a lot of the things that I was able to accumulate at that time. And for me, it was a lesson learned of not overextending oneself, not only resources, but personally. And this is one of the lessons I learned from previous generations of leaders that have influenced me in my home and in my church. I didn't see enough of them restore themselves. I didn't see enough of them take care of themselves. And as you indicated earlier, some people think that the flashy presentation of a leader is what leadership is, particularly in the church. That's not necessarily true. That is true for some individuals, and that's not an example of how to take care of oneself. That's just being selfish, right? And that's feeding a desire you have. I learned the importance of resonant leadership. And I know that term because my wife got me that book early in our marriage from a course she was taking. And resonant leadership says you find those moments where you engage in an activity to restore your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And you're intentional about that restoration. While it may look like you're taking a break, it may look like you're resting. And in fact, the restorative activities you engage in is a part of your leadership. It is a part of your decision making. It is a part of your influence. And as I've learned that lesson, she bought the book right after the crash. So, that book, while it wasn't relevant then, it became relevant years later. And I've learned that lesson from that mistake, man, knowing when to call it quits, knowing when to push forward, knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to, stand your ground. That first business was everything, man. And, ultimately, we've learned from it. We recovered. It took a while. It took a long while. But it was a very impressionable experience on my own leadership.
Well, that brings to mind something else that I talk about quite a bit. Back in the Industrial Revolution era, where most of business was done by physical labor. So you had the manufacturing facilities, you had people working on coal mines, and there was physical labor. And those who were fortunate enough to get vacation time, vacation would be having a few days of not doing physical labor, right? So if I do physical labor every day and then for 5 days I get to not do physical labor, then that is a vacation. Well, in today's age, it's not so much physical labor. There still is a good degree of that, but many businesses and many leaders, it's an intellectual work ethic. You're thinking constantly. You're playing out scenarios constantly. And so if you then take a vacation and you go to Tahiti and you're still thinking about the business, you're still thinking about the project, you're still working over scenarios, and then you come back from Tahiti, you still haven't taken a vacation. You still haven't restored yourself, and you're probably even more worn out than you were before you left because now you felt guilty about, not spending time with your family. So,
what I would say, man, sometimes I even question the value of quote vacation. And you brought up something so critical. People don't realize how much effort it takes to think and strategize. It is a drain on your physical body, the amount of thinking a leader does. Imagine, playing a chess game. If you ever observed a chess game, and the intensity with which the players play the game, they're forecasting 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead. If you transpose that to running a business, leading a team, it is the same thing, except the game doesn't end in 20 minutes. The game ends in a quarter at the end of the fiscal year, or it doesn't end until 3 years from now, until the project is over. It is a constant churning. And when I discovered that's what leaders do, one, I knew I found my lane. Two, I have developed a profound respect for those who are leaders, and an appreciation for those who are bad leaders, because hey, when somebody really shouldn't be in that role because you're not a strategic thinker, you're not thinking 5, 10 steps ahead, and you can project the failure of a business if they're not undergirded by supportive leaders. So, so all that factors into it, man. But, all that to say, I think even vacation can be, quote, overrated. And what I've discovered, Galen, the restorative activities I engage in aren't necessarily a week-long vacation. I've discovered when I went on my honeymoon that a week-long, out of the country excursion is too much, man. I need maybe 2-3 days of that, and I'm ready to go back to work. My wife is the same way. But this is where podcasting, this is where biking comes into play for me. These are short spurts of restorative activities that require an intentional focus on these activities that takes me away from whatever is taking up most of my brain power. So when I'm on a bike and I'm taking a 30, 50 mile ride and it takes a couple hours, all I'm focused on is managing my energy, managing pain, focused on my destination. Those 2 hours distracted me from whatever I might have been working on. Right. That's more restful to me than a week-long trip to Tahiti, where I'm laying on the beach, sipping on, pina coladas, eating out of a wine glass, but I'm still thinking about the office. Did they turn off the lights? Did they sign that contract? I need to text. Oh, I don't got no service, right? So now you're worried about it till you get back in the States. So, man, it can be overrated depending on the type of person you are.
Right. Hey, so one of the things, and this is actually one of the last things I guess we'll talk about, but you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that it's important for leaders to read and read a variety. What are some things that you're reading right now? What are some books that either you just finished or that you're getting into now that you're really, really excited about? And then I'll share a couple that I'm into right now.
There are a couple of books I'm reading. So one of the books I'm reading is The Creature of Jekyll Island. For those of you who are interested in the financial infrastructure of the U.S. and world economy, it's an interesting read, to say the least. I have reread for, the millionth time, The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. That book was given to me years ago, and when I read it over past Christmas again, it reminded me of my team and I. And it talks about the way a team should be built and the culture within. I continue to read a book that continues to pour into me, especially in this season of my life, and that is The Richest Man in Babylon. That book, again, is an old school book about wealth building, skill development, investment, etc. And then outside of those personal development materials, I'm constantly consuming stuff about leadership, about small business, cultural things that influence the customers I serve, the way what's on their mind. So I'm all over YouTube, social media, just consuming content to understand the people I serve and to understand people that I call friends.
One of the books that I have really become a fan of over the last 6 months, I've owned the book for about 25 years now, but really got into it about 6 months ago, and that is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. That's one of those books that everyone is supposed to own. So I've owned it. Everyone is supposed to have read it. So I kind of thumbed through it. I could quote a couple things if anyone asked me about it. But I did a 10-week intensive study with an accountability group of that book. And it has really, really changed how I think about how the brain works and how we are supposed to be operating. There's a interesting quote by, I think it was Galileo, that says, he was talking about the difference between, or the connection between science and religion. And he said that the Bible tells you how to go to heaven, but science tells you how the heavens go. And I believe similarly, the Bible tells you why you're here. And this book, Think and Grow Rich, tells you how to make the best use out of your time here, how to get the most out of it. So that is one that I am actually kind of embarrassed that it's taken me this long to read it. Another book that I've gotten into, literally, I just bought it this past week because it was recommended to me by a new mentor of mine. It's called The Artist Way. And this is by Julia Cameron. I don't know if you're familiar with it. This one is the 25th anniversary edition. So this has been out for a while. But this book, The Artist Way, A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity, it talks about how everyone is creative. Every kid is creative. But we've got an artist brain and we've got a logical brain. And our logical brain is that small voice inside your head that asks you to rationalize everything that you're trying to do. Give me justification as to why this is going to work. Whereas children, their logic brain isn't developed. It's just not fully developed. So they just end up doing things. So I'm really starting to get into it and really, really excited about what that's going to bring towards the coaching that I do for other leaders.
Yeah, I will tell you a book my wife gave me last year that I sing the praises of. And that book is, pulling it up now, Business Secrets from the Bible, Spiritual Success Strategies for Financial Abundance. It was written by Rabbi Daniel Lapin. And he talks about the Bible from a business standpoint. And ultimately, he espouses that the Bible is a business book. Business is our core function of being here. He talks about community and faith and everything that goes along with it. And when I read that book last year, my wife gave it to me at a critical time where I was making some key decisions. And that is a book you read and reread and reread again.
Sure. Hey, very similar, as I was thinking about Think and Grow Rich, the backstory behind that book was that it was actually written, Napoleon Hill was a big-time Christian minister. And when he first wrote the book, it was laced with scripture. And it was laced with references to Jesus and references to the church and operating specifically within the church. And when he took it to his publisher, the publisher said, "You got some good stuff here, but you're kind of strong on this church stuff. You got to take the church stuff out. That's not going to sell." And so he went back through his manuscript. He took out all of the references to church. He took out most of the references to Jesus, but the concepts and the principles are the same. And so when I was reading the book, I was like, sounds like I've heard this before. I mean, this concept, I know this was written in 1937, but this sounds very familiar. And so I ended up talking to one of my new mentors, who has been, she's been devoted to this Think Grow Rich book for many, many years. And she was the one that told me the backstory of why the principles seem so similar. So again, I'm embarrassed that it's taken me so long to read that book.
Yeah, I would tell any leader who's struggling with thinking big, I'll also encourage them to read The Blue Ocean Strategy. The Secret is a book that has spoken into me. Resonant Leadership. And those are that's the short list of books that I would recommend. I recently read a book called CEO Tools 2.0. A system to think, manage, and lead like a CEO. Very key to thinking and leading on a regular basis. Perfect.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, hey, this has been outstanding. I always enjoy having conversations with you. This was my first opportunity to actually interview you, to learn more about your background, how you have come to be who you are. There's one book that I have not read, but I am definitely going to get. And you may have heard of this book. It's called Leverage, Taking Advantage of Your Right Now to Build Your Tomorrow. Tell me more. Who's the author of this book, and what can you tell me about it?
This little book here. It's a little book that was written a handful of years ago by a guy named William Clark before he became a doctor. But this book actually was born out of a sermon series I preached at my home church in Philadelphia. And actually, part of this book was inspired by Jacob, who became wealthy because he leveraged what was available to him. And the biblical example of how to create wealth from thin air is right in your hands. And I talk about it in this book. And then also there's another little book that I probably should have mentioned that I have read and continue to read, is Sustainable, How to Create a Sustainable Faith-Based Nonprofit and a faith-based institution. And I talk about strategies and a philosophy behind how to sustain your organization independent of traditional sources for your nonprofit or church. So go ahead and grab those books. I think they're awesome reads, and they should be read on a repeat.
Perfect. Well, hey, man, I have enjoyed the conversation. How can the world get a hold of you if they want to get more of you, but on a one-on-one basis? How can they get a hold of Dr. William Clark?
Yeah, man. As I say on Leadership Conversations and Leadership and stuff, follow, like, and share this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, TV, Twitter, and YouTube at Dr. William P. Clark. And that's how you can get a hold of me. And you can go to williampclark.com as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, this has been another episode of the Leadership Toolbox, this time talking with Dr. William P. Clark. And this is Galen Bingham. I believe that everyone is designed to be the greatest in the world at something. And therefore, your life's mission is to find your thing so that you can get on with being the greatest in the world. I hope that you found this to be a helpful addition to your toolbox as a leader, because every success and every failure begins and ends with leadership. Until next time, take care.
See ya. Peace.